This week, we're going to look at a Medrash from the Genesis story, Bereshit. So we're going to read the verse in the Torah that this is speaking about, and we're going to notice that there's something not quite right or that needs explanation, and then we're going to see how the rabbis explained it. Sounds good? Great. Pass that around. Let's do it. I apologize. I already see that the sources are misnumbered. It starts with a 2. That's also to get you to think, what came before? I'm joking. Hello. Okay. Yeah, please come in. Okay. Emily, how's your narrator voice?
It's pretty good.
It's pretty good. Okay, so you want to start us off with Genesis 1:26.
I read it in English.
Please.
And Elohim said, "Let us make humankind in our image, as our likeness, and they will reign over the fish of the sea, and over the birds of the sky, and over the animals, and over all of the land, and creeping thing that crawls on the land."
Amazing. So this is the first moment when we even see the conception of humanity. This is the first moment that God mentions human beings. And so this is kind of like the blueprint of what a human being is for. Because as we know, when God says something, right, God speaking and bringing into being is a bit superfluous. It's like, if you're God, you don't need to say anything. You just do it. So what's the point of speaking and then bringing into being? Any guesses? Why does God say, "Let there be light," and then there's light? Why? Just skip that step.
So we can understand why he did it.
Okay, so obviously the general rule is anytime God does something that seems like he doesn't need to do it, for example, creating the world in 7 days, he couldn't do it in a second, the general rule is it's instruction for us. We're meant to learn from it. So what are we meant to learn when God speaks and then brings something into being? What are we learning? So one answer, like Gabriel is saying, is it's the intent. Sometimes God will reveal the intent of what he's doing in the speech. Because speech is the closest thing that God does to thinking, right? For us, for human beings, we have thought, speech, and action. Speech is actually the interface between thought and action. You ever notice that your speech actually originates in the thing that connects the organ of thought and the rest of your body, which is based in action? So speech is the interface between those two things. So when God brings something into being, the first thing he reveals is the spoken element, because we're usually not privy to God's thoughts, whatever that means, but we are privy to the closest thing to thoughts that are brought out into express manifest behavior. So that's a thought. That's a word. So he speaks and then brings into being. And it's the same thing is true with us. Whenever we create something, we have this mental, vocal process that takes place first, and then we bring it into being. As my favorite Mormon Stephen Covey always says, there's always 2 creations to things. There's the creation in ideal and the creation in practice. And you have to do both of those. Okay. Go out and read 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. If you've never read it before, it's an amazing book. So, Rashi, Rabbi Shlomo Yitzchaki, our commentary par excellence, the 11th century French rabbinic commentary, says, "Let us make mankind." There's something off about that statement. What rubs us the wrong way when God says, "Let us make humankind"?
Us.
What's problematic with that?
God is making something. Who's the us?
Who's we? Last time I checked, we are not a polytheistic religion, and yet, right at the beginning of the Torah, this isn't like hidden away, tucked away somewhere in the middle. What do? We're letting it slip? Fooled you. We're actually, believe in Mount Olympus, and it's really Zeus and Athena and Hera who are all coming together to create God. So Rashi, understandably, when he sees a problem in the text that requires explanation, he says, well, who's us? So what's his answer? His answer is, we learned the humbleness of God from here. God has a trait of, it's a very hard word to translate, invesanuso, which is something like, it's like the word of humility, right? From his modesty, his humility, he doesn't want to be too arrogant. From here we learn his humility. Because humankind is created in the likeness of the angels, there's a part of humanity that is part angel and part animal, right? So you have three elements of created beings in the metaphysical universe. You have angels, you have humans, and you have animals. Two of them have no free will. Angels have no free will because they're simply spiritual beings, so they have no lower inclination. So it's like, imagine if you saw everything perfectly clearly and you had no desire for short-term gratification. Then you'd be a malach, you'd be an angel. Animals have no free will because they're only instinct. So human beings are a combination of the two. That heavenly divine clarity, but it's somehow clouded by that lower, baser animalistic instinct. Nonetheless, especially towards the beginning of the creation of humanity, we were much more like angelic beings than we were like animals. Because humankind is created in the likeness of the angels, and they might envy him, why on earth would angels envy him? Why would they envy humans? If they're like even more spiritual, have even more clarity than we do, so what's the envy?
They can't do what they want.
They don't have free will.
They don't want anything.
Free will is a pretty awesome tool. It's a pretty amazing thing. It's actually divine. It is divine. According to many opinions, when God says, let's make humankind like us, or later on when it says humans are created in the image of God, there are some opinions that say that means they have free will. They are free. Yeah.
But then how can
it mean he's like, yeah.
How can angels envy man if they don't have free will? It's not envy. Free will, right?
Because that could be built into their nature, right? You could just have envy without. There's a positive type of envy. It's a good question, right? So you're saying, since they have no lower instinct, how can you feel jealous? How can you feel envious? It's a great question. Let's say that the envy, so there are even sources in the Torah that say that God is envious, right? Have you ever heard of this? I'm a jealous God. What does that mean? So if you're an atheist, you're like, you see, God's a tyrant and he's got a Napoleonic complex and all he wants are people to bow down to him and tell him how great he is. If you're a little bit more intelligent than that and you think for just a moment, you'd say, okay, well, what type of envy are we speaking about? So without getting off too much on a tangent, because there's a lot to talk about here, healthy envy is when you see somebody who is devoting their attention to something lower than you. It's like it's insulting to me and to you when you devote your time and energy to something that is not worth your time and energy. That's the envy that God has. But what it, and by the way, it doesn't mean like I am jealous, right? It's a display of envy, and what it really means is I don't tolerate. My perfection doesn't tolerate that level of imperfection. That's kind of what it means. Okay, so because humankind is in the likeness of the angels, they might envy him. Therefore, he took counsel with them, and this is an amazing, just in terms of the character traits that we're meant to be learning here about how to be good people. If you're ever in a position of authority, no matter what, even if you know the right answer already, you ask the advice of people who are below you. That's a winning strategy every single time. And don't make it seem like they're the charity case and you're just doing it as a token, but really listen to them and really take their advice on board. Like, God doesn't need any help in terms of how to create human beings, but if you want to get people bought into your vision, then ask them what they think. Now, here's the real question. If we were to double click on this, then we might ask ourselves, well, what did that conversation look like? What counsel did they give him when God said, should we create human beings? And here we turn to Medrash Rabbah. So I'm going to recite the Medrash. I'm just going to speak it out. And then you guys are going to go off and ask as many questions as you possibly can. So as I'm reading through it, take a mental note of all the things that don't really make sense to you, or questions that we need answers to, any type of incongruency or lack of clarity, you name it. Said Rabbi Simon, at the moment that Hashem came to create the first human, the heavenly beings, these angels, formed factions and groups. Some of them said that he should not be created, and some said he should. This is what is said, and now they're going to appropriate one of the verses in Tehillim, in Psalms, in another part of the Torah, and say that's actually talking about this episode. Loving kindness and truth, so chesed and emes, loving kindness and truth approached each other. Righteousness and peace, tzedek and shalom, confronted each other. Loving kindness said he should be created because he'll perform acts of kindness. Truth said he should not be created because he'll be full of lies. So loving kindness and truth were having an argument. Righteousness said he should be created because he'll do acts of righteousness. And peace said he should not be created because he will create conflict. So we now have a royal rumble in the heavens. You have a split, right? 2 on 2. So what did Hashem do? He took truth and threw it to the earth. He took truth and threw it to the earth. As it says, and you threw truth towards the earth. That's another verse in Daniel. So often what the Medrash will do is it will flatten all of the verses in the Torah and say everything's fair game when we're using this kind of... So a beautiful way of understanding Medrash, I heard from one person, is you could imagine Medrash is almost like the subconscious of the text. So in the same way that your subconscious does not work in a linear way, right? It makes neural connections that are non-linear. So when you're dreaming, right, you'll put 2 parts of your life together that should not be together. It's like your friend from childhood and a coworker. And you're like, what are you guys doing in the same room? So the same thing is true with Medrash. Medrash says we're going to make these neural connections that from a linear point of view, this one took place hundreds of years later, this one took place in a different time and place, but we're going to combine them in this beautiful web. That's what the Medrash is doing. You threw truth towards the earth. So God says, we can't take the stalemate. It's 2 on 2. So what will I do? I'll just chuck one of you out of the room. So now it's 2 against 1. Sounds like we can now move ahead with the human project. The heavenly being said before Hashem, Master of the worlds, why are you denigrating your seal? There's a saying that the seal of God is truth. Wherever you see truth, that's where you see God. That's his imprint. Why are you denigrating your seal, which is truth? He responded, truth will rise from the earth. As it says in Psalms, truth from the earth will sprout, which comes from the same chapter of Tehillim, of Psalms, where it says that loving kindness and truth, righteousness and peace approached each other. So somehow the resolution to this whole saga is God says, don't worry, you haven't seen the last of truth. Truth will rise from the ground. End of the story. Okay, take the person next to you, take a minute or 2, and work out just as many questions as you can. Before we can get an answer, you have to have a question. So let's just make sure that we clarify the questions. 1, 2, 3, go. Okay, ladies, gentlemen, let's, I'm sure we didn't all have enough time to get through everything, but I hope that together we'll all have a whole bunch of questions. So go for it. What have we got? What are the big questions on the text?
Why truth?
What do you mean, why truth?
So why was truth the guy, the
Being,
entity
right?
that was thrown down to the earth,
As opposed to?
like before 3 others?
Oh, so, all right. Gabriel's asking an excellent question. Obviously, God wants to create humans, right? We know the end of the story. He's definitely leaning in that direction.
There was another.
So God had 2 options of who to kick out of heaven. Truth or peace. So why didn't he kick out peace? That's a great question.
Why didn't he kick out both?
Why didn't he kick out both? Amazing. You could ask it that way as well. Good. So, why did he throw out truth and not peace? Why didn't he throw out both of them? Excellent. Next.
What good does throwing truth to the earth do to solve the problem? Because earth is where human beings are coming from.
Great. Okay. The big question on this is, truth and peace have very legitimate arguments to make about human beings. We are full of lies, and we do get in a lot of conflict. They're not wrong. How is this resolving that? how has anything been fixed by throwing truth to the ground and letting it rise back up? Is that kind of your question?
Yeah.
Great, good. That's the million-dollar question, but there's a lot of questions here. So let's keep going.
Yeah, my question was, why do loving kindness and truth approach, but peace and righteousness and peace confront? So
Yeah.
Chesed ve'emet nifgeshu, so that means they met.
Mm-hmm.
Nifgeshu. Tzedek v'shalom nashaku. So why is there an asymmetry there?
Yes.
Why, if it's 2-on-2 and there's two pairs of people arguing,
Yeah.
if the different words mean that they've got to be arguing in a kind of different way, otherwise you just say the people who are on one side
That's
will make
right.
the people on the other side, and there won't be
Yeah.
a distinction. And
So
then-
after studying this for about, I think I first worked on this about 5 years ago, I have not yet found an answer to that question. So maybe
I
we'll
can go.
figure it. You win, yeah.
I win.
No. Unfortunately, that means that you have to stay because now we've got to figure out the answer together.
Got it.
So maybe we'll come to an answer. Who knows if we can think about it. What else? There's a couple really big whammies in here. So far we have why throw out peace, truth and not peace, or both of them. And the second one is why, how does it help, right? How have we resolved anything? Anything else?
What does it even mean,
Why-
truth or righteousness?
Okay, what does that look like? We know this is all some metaphor for something. So what is the metaphor of truth rising from the earth? It sounds very poetic, but what exactly does that mean? Great, good. Okay, anything else?
God wanted to create man, why did he ask the angel's opinion rather than just...
Okay, good,
doing
great
it?
question. So we addressed that when we read the Rashi, which is we wanted to, God wanted to display his modesty. And therefore, even though he already knew the answer, he felt that, well, let's get everybody on board by holding a board meeting and we'll get
Is that
everyone's
not
opinion.
More arrogant, though?
What?
Is that not more arrogant?
I don't think so.
Asking an opinion
I think if a
and then-
boss dictatorially says, okay, I've made the decision and that's it. This is what you're all doing. As opposed to saying, come on everyone, let's come together. We've got it, it's obviously you can do it in a way that's condescending or you can do it in a way that's empowering.
I think
right?
if someone asked my opinion and then completely ignored everything that I had to say, I would feel worse than if they just didn't ask my opinion in the first
Well,
place.
certainly if you got thrown out of the boardroom, that might be true, right? Now, this brings up another interesting question, which I hope we can answer by the very end, which is, why now? In other words, if you want to display God's modesty, so find somewhere else to do this. This is one of the most prominent verses in the entire Torah. It's the introduction to what it means to be a human being. And right now, you're going to confuse the heck out of every single reader, make them think that possibly I'm reading a polytheistic text only in order to get people to realize that you should be nice to other people in the room even though you already know the answer. I mean, that's a lot of work. There's a lot of downsides to that strategy, no? So why do that right here, right now? That's another big question. And for time's sake, I'll add in one other question, which is this. I saw somebody, one of the commentaries asked this question. It's a fantastic question, which is, yeah, I get that loving kindness and righteousness say he should be created because he'll do these acts. But, you know, humans can be pretty cruel and unrighteous. So I could have easily imagined them to be on the other side of the argument, and vice versa. There are a lot of humans who tell the truth and create peace. So it seems a little bit arbitrary. Why is it that Chesed and Tzedek are arguing for? They could easily be arguing on the other side. And the same thing is true with Shalom and Emes. It's a good question, no? Okay, so with these questions in mind, let's slowly try to break open what is happening here. So God says, we want to create this project called humanity, and I want to know whether it's worthwhile. And these heavenly beings represent the attributes with which God is going to use to create humans and also to judge human beings. So we want to know these are the most important elements of what we want humanity to emulate, and are they capable of doing it? So you have these two factions. You have Chesed and Emes, and Chesed and Tzedek, and you have truth and peace. And God says, we're going to throw truth out of the ground, out of the heavens. We're going to throw it to the ground. So one of the questions that we had was, why throw away truth? Why not throw away peace? So the Kotzker Rebbe, who was a 19th century Hasidic rabbi, he was known for his very sharp wit. He said very terse statements, and you were kind of left to your own devices to figure out what he meant. So he said that when God threw truth out of heaven, then peace no longer had a claim. So the Kotzker Rebbe says, when truth is out of the picture, then peace no longer has a claim. So what the commentary suggests is the following. The reason why human beings are so in conflict with each other is because there exists something called truth, with a capital T. When truth is up there, immutable, in the heavens, then you and I will use truth as a weapon to bash each other over the heads and say, my truth is right, and you say, no, my truth is right. In other words, if truth is something that is above us all, then humans don't get along. Humans don't get along. The Kotzker Rebbe says, when you throw truth out of the picture, then all of a sudden, what is there to fight about? What is there to fight about? It's like you live with your truth, I live with my truth. As long as we're doing okay and we respect each other, as long as we still have loving kindness and righteousness, then who needs truth? We can just really get along as a pluralistic, happy, friendly humanity.
But isn't my truth an oxymoron?
Explain.
As in, they're like antithetical words that...
Yeah. So obviously we're human beings, and human beings don't all have access to the truth. And yet, if we see truth as something that is immutable and unchanging, then what that means is I have the presumption of thinking that I can take all of that and there's one objective truth, and that's the only perspective there is. And if you don't share my perspective, then I will kill you. Right? And that's, I think, how human beings have been behaving for quite a long time. But maybe contained with this is the answer. So the Kotzker Rebbe says, once you've thrown truth out of the picture, now it's not 2 against 1, it's 2 against nothing. So that, Amelie, is why why God didn't throw both of them out of the picture. Once you throw away truth, then peace is just silent. Okay, now what happens? God says, so the angels say, we have a problem. You can't just throw away truth. Like, truth is really important. Truth is your seal. Truth means that there's something real and objective about reality. In other words, if you and I are having a disagreement, then let's say we're having a disagreement about how to fix education in this country, or we're having a disagreement about what's the best policy for agriculture, anything, how we should farm. To say, well, you and I should just get along because, who knows what's true. Well, you're really not going to accomplish anything, are you? Yes? No? The reason why we say that God's seal is truth is the understanding of truth in the Torah, Aleph, Mem, Tet, means it's the widest perspective possible. In the same way that the word for truth is the beginning, middle, and last letter of the alphabet. Truth is actually the broadest perspective possible. If you have every single angle available to you, then you have the truth. Now, we don't really typically think about truth that way, but I think that's a really good working definition of what truth is. Truth is if you have the widest perspective possible. If you have every single possible factor and variable, and you're working with all of that, then that's called truth. Now, by contrast, the word for falsehood in Hebrew, sheker, is shin kuf resh. They're 3 letters that are right next to each other in the alphabet, but they're arranged out of order. Right? In the normal alphabet, they're kuf resh shin. So falsehood is the smallest, most narrow perspective possible, taken out of context and in the wrong order. So you've distorted the picture. You're saying, I'm only taking this narrow sliver of reality, and I'm going to mix up all of the, right? So we can apply that to many current events today, but that's the working definition of falsehood. So when we say that the truth is God's seal, what we're saying is that anytime I look around the world and I'm able to see that there's something that captures just the widest perspective possible, then you can say, oh, that's the mark of the divine. Because in truth, there really is only one perspective that's able to capture everything. God, right? Any other point in the universe is always looking from the vantage point of subjectivity. There's something behind me that I'm not getting. There's some viewpoint that I'm not understanding that you have that I don't. Only the thing that exists outside of all of reality is capable of saying, I know all of reality. Yes? Fair enough? So that's the seal of God. Okay? So that's truth. So God throws truth to the ground and everyone starts complaining. You can't just have a world with no truth. There's got to be some working perspective definition of what's real. What are we going for? If there's no truth, if there's no objectivity in the world, then we can duke this out and if anybody begs to differ. But I would make a pretty solid claim for the idea that if we hold of moral relativism, if we say that there is really no objective truth, then it's absolutely impossible for you to say that there's something called right and wrong. There is no such thing as morality if you don't buy into objective truth. If anybody would like to speak that out a little bit more, we can. But I think I think you can make a very strong argument for that there is no way to say something is right or wrong. And I think I've made this point in the past, but it's worth reconsidering. A lot of people say that there are certain things that you can look at in the world that is objectively wrong. I would argue no, there isn't. You could look at Nazi ideology and justify it if there's no such thing as objective truth. Okay, they got the science wrong, right? Obviously, it's not blonde hair and blue eyes that makes the perfect human, it's something else. Let's select for compassion, intelligence, hard work. We'll find all the best traits in all the best humans, and we'll kill everyone else, and we'll create a superior race of human beings. Why is that not a good strategy? If there's no such thing as objective morality, then that's not an easy position to attack. No? Yes? No? Maybe?
I have a question.
Yeah, please do, yeah.
Because about, the difference between emet and sheker, and
Yeah.
the intentionality. There's lying, or there's when you say a lie, and you're saying something that's not true, you're saying something that's false.
Yeah.
There are all kinds of things that are false that are not lies, right? That you just happen to be wrong.
Yes.
The difference is whether you're trying to trick someone or not, the intentionality behind the act. Also, to lie, you kind of have to know or think that you know what is right, so that you cannot accidentally tell them that thing.
Okay.
Otherwise, it doesn't make sense to lie to anyone. If you don't know you have to do not what you think is the case. And what you're talking about with the relativism and objective truth is trying to reconcile, two of us are saying the same thing and one of us is wrong. How do we resolve when we don't agree with each other?
Mm-hmm.
Is it because something genuine exists and only one person has understood it, the other person's not seeing it for whatever reason, or there's nothing? As you're saying, the relativist position is just actually a skeptical one. There is an objective truth. And so my question is, I think that when all the balagan, the chaos in the world, is a lot less from people all scheming, as if they all know, exactly the right answer, and they're I'm going to just tell everyone that it's not this thing, it's that thing instead. It's more
Sure.
People saying things that they genuinely believe to be true, and there not being anything that shows them otherwise. So all of their beliefs cohere with all their other beliefs. Social media makes it worse, which is a really easy thing to see, where you're not actually ever seeing anything in your
And their
feed.
confirmation bias just shows them all the things that they
You
want
just
to
see
see.
everything that you want to see more, and you
Yeah,
never have a
okay.
conversation with someone who thinks otherwise. So but if truth is seeing beyond your narrow perspective, or trying to attain the ultimate perspective,
Right.
but the ultimate perspective, like, is God, then it doesn't really feel like truth is any more on the earth than it was before.
Good, okay. So now we have to answer the question, what does it mean that truth rises from the ground? What does it mean? So there are a lot of commentaries that suggest that what it means when this Medrash says, he threw the truth to the ground and it will rise from the ground, that's referring to the giving of the Torah at Mount Sinai. Now, the giving of the Torah at Mount Sinai, this is a nice preparation for Shavuot, does not just mean God hands us over a document and says sign at the bottom. According to the Talmudic rabbinic interpretation of what happened at Mount Sinai, was that God actually handed over the keys to the law at Mount Sinai. So he gave us the rules, but he also gave us the system of interpretation, and he gave us the authority of interpretation. And he says, here, now it's yours. I gave you the groundwork, I gave you the bare guidelines, but now it's up to you to understand and apply this law as you see fit. So according to this understanding, when God throws truth to the ground, somehow there's going to be some sort of resolution in the fact that now we are somehow the arbiters. We're the ones who are in charge of stewarding truth. We now have to figure out truth. To such an extent that there are passages in the Talmud where the rabbis come up with a certain position, and another rabbi says, no, you're all wrong, and I'll prove it to you. Let a voice come down from heaven and tell everyone that you're wrong. And a voice comes down from heaven and says, you're all wrong. And the rabbis laugh and say, the Torah is not in the heavens. It's not there anymore. It's ours. What we decide is true. That's truth. So, and then there's laughter coming out of heaven, and God says, my children have defeated me. He's proud. He says, great, good for you. You figured it out. You got it. So truth is rising from the ground. Now the question is, well, how does all of this help? What does this do for humanity such that we will somehow not use truth as a weapon, somehow not come to conflict anymore, so that the whole human project is a worthy endeavor? So truth in the heavens means that truth does not change, right? The heavens are a place where nothing's different, nothing changes. The key word here is the verb of sprout. When he responds, truth will rise from the earth, it quotes the verse in Psalms that says, Emes me'eretz titzmach. It will sprout from the ground. Now, there's a couple of beautiful commentaries that explain it like this. Truth can either be a static thing, or it can be a dynamic process. When truth is handed to you, then truth becomes something immutable, and you've already got the answers already. In that case, there's no wiggle room, there's no room for movement, and there's no room for input. You're either right or you're wrong, it's either black or it's white. What happens when truth becomes a dynamic process? And what I mean is this. If you've ever sat in a class, maybe similar to this one, where you're looking at a text and everybody's sitting around the room trying to figure out together how to arrive at the right answer, there is an admission at the very beginning that none of us individually possesses the truth, and that all of us are engaged in a project to try to seek the truth together. That's what it means that the truth sprouts from the ground. Sprouting is an organic process. It's like a tree. You start with a leaf, and then it grows a branch, and then it grows another one. That's the way that we're meant to approach truth. When the Jewish people were given the Torah, God said, okay, now it's like the teacher assigning a group project to everyone, saying, I'm grading you not just on the final result, but how did you arrive at the answer? The whole process of how a tree grows is essential to the growth of the tree. So when you're turning truth into a dynamic process, you are forcing people to A, have to admit that I can't do it without you, but B, recognize that you can't get to truth without cooperation.
I would argue though that if you look at if truth is a movable thing that changes. Surely it should change over time, and I would argue that if you look at our society and Judaism in general, and our community and the way that we approach truth and what is true,
Yeah.
which is our religion and what we have been told and these rules that we follow, I would argue that compared to the rest of society, we have had a much harder time moving with
Okay.
moving with things
Great.
and adjusting our truth.
Okay, fantastic question. So the heart of this is, well, are we advocating for an objective truth after all, or is it all changing? And in that case, there is no real one truth. So I would say like this. There is still something called truth, with a capital T. There is something called that objective perspective, where you get all the angles and you can say, I understand and I can see, if you were God, right, what's the right answer? The question is, how do you get to that answer? So God says, I want you to live in a world where showing your work is as important as getting to the right answer. So at the end of the day, yeah, there is an objective truth called do not murder. Okay? But I need you to figure out exactly what that means, and when does that apply, and why is that true? And when you arrive at that answer together, then all of a sudden you can stand back and say, look, we've put all the puzzle pieces together and we built it together. We now individually all have some piece in truth. That truth is part of me, right? Because I've lent my contribution, I've lent my perspective to the bigger picture of what truth is, which was really what every single one of us is here to do. At the end of every Amidah, when we pray the standing prayer, the last thing we ask for is V'tein chelkeinu b'toratecha. Give us our portion in your Torah. Show me what's my unique contribution to truth. That's what I'm here to reveal. The second answer I would say to you, and this is a bit more dangerous, is how old are you, Amelie?
21.
Okay, you've lived 21 years on this planet. I don't think you have the authority to say whether or not the Torah has changed over time. I'll say it like this. I'm a firm believer that there's something called absolute truth. I don't think at any point we'll be able to rationalize away murder or Shabbat or any one of those big mitzvot in the Torah. However, Jewish society 3,000 years ago looked nothing like what it looks like today. Nothing. I mean, you could recognize some things, right? I'm sure they probably, the men didn't cut their sideburns, and notoriously, whenever archaeologists dig in an ancient Jewish area, the way that they can tell that it's a Jewish area is, does anyone know? Sometimes mikvah, but that's only if there's a mikvah there, right? If it's no pig bones, no pig bones. So there are obviously things that we can recognize, but so much of the looser aspects of what Jewish society is, it is drastically different.
I meant more comparatively.
Right. Well,
to the rest of the
well,
world,
let's.
rather than-
So I would say like this. Growth. Growth does not necessarily mean progress. Movement and change does not necessarily mean progress. There is a condition where you want cells to divide and to replenish themselves. When a cell divides too quickly, that's called cancer. So I'm not saying that Western society is cancer, but there is certainly such a thing as growing too fast and changing just for the sake of change. And you could make a pretty strong case for the fact that nowadays what people call progress is really just trying to destroy as many old rules as possible, regardless of whether the rules make sense. Okay, so I want to finish here, but I want to sum everything up that we've said. We've asked, why is it that God throws out truth and not peace? And that's because the lack of peace is conditional on truth being in the heavens. Somehow when we throw truth to the ground, that now automatically makes humans more capable of achieving both truth and peace. How is that possible? It's because when we are the stewards of truth, then we recognize our innate need to cooperate and to contribute our perspective towards the attainment and rebuilding of truth. And when we do that, then we realize that truth is something that requires every single human being. It's not something that lives up there and I can compare you to that. It's something that all of us need to take part in, and that will naturally, hopefully, create a lot more peace. What's so amazing and ironic and counterintuitive is that one of the reasons why Jews get along better is because we're really good at arguing with each other. If you haven't seen this week, there's this well-known, he does these videos. I think he started on Facebook, but he's now all over the place. What's his name? Naz Daily. He just put out a video this week where he spent a month in yeshiva. And the title is, I studied Judaism for 1 month, now I love to argue. And that was basically the message. Was when he came out, he said, what's so beautiful is that these people are screaming at each other all day, and then at the end they just give each other a big hug. Because that's exactly what's going on. We are sublimating that urge to want to fight and to want to create conflict, but we're doing it towards the purposes of achieving a higher goal together. I didn't mention why it is that loving kindness and charity were on one side and truth and peace were on the other, when you could have had them going on to the other side. We don't have time for that. I will end with this, however. We asked at the very end, why is it that God chooses right now to say, let us make humankind, right now, right here, on this very auspicious passage? And I think the answer is exactly what we just saw. We just saw that the whole path to peace is creating an environment where everyone comes together and works on truth together. Isn't that exactly what Rashi said God did in that moment? When God said, let us make humans, that's the DNA, that's the blueprint of what it means to be a human. The first utterance that God spoke of what a human being is by definition, he's building into what it means to be a human this idea, let us make a human. What he's really saying is the only way that a human being can work is if I, in the creation of a human being, model what a human being must be. I'm going to get together my entire council and we're going to work on this truth together. And that's how humanity is going to be shaped from that moment on. It's so beautiful, it's so amazing that built into the structure of what a human being is from the very outset is this entire message. And so the rabbis were trying to teach us, what is the secret? How is it that we get along? How do we overcome all these real human challenges that we've been facing for thousands of years of war and conflict and tragedy and people arguing with each other and fighting with each other all the time? And the answer is this: truth has to sprout from the ground. And if you recognize that that is the fundamental role of every single individual, our unique contribution to the truth, to watch it grow together, then that just might be the solution to everything. I have argued in the past that every educational system should adopt the Talmudic one, the one where a textbook is not written like just a piece of information, because you know what that is? That's truth in the heavens. Well, everyone knows that Newtonian physics is the only right answer until it isn't, or until your side of the story is different and my side of the story is different. The way that textbook should be written is, this scientist says this and that scientist says that, and this is what they argued about. That would be a much healthier way to get people to realize that that's really how we grow and build and come together as a civilization. So may we all integrate such knowledge and wisdom and be able to live that in our own lives. But this, I think, is the deep answer that this riddle is trying to teach us.